Resident Evil 2 always will be one of the most critically acclaimed survival horror titles in the franchise, which is why so many were hyped to the moon to be getting a remake. After release, the praise came pouring in. While many problems would be found with the character development and the story, there was one big omission that bugged me a lot, and that was the helicopter crash at the RPD building, something that was not properly explained in the remake. We know where it crashed and the aftermath, but who or what caused it? Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to stay notified of new Resident Evil content. The helicopter crash in Resident Evil 2 is one of the most iconic sequences out of the original games, along with the first zombie and the RPD's last stand in the streets of Raccoon City. The events of the crash are as follows. Elliot Edward tries to flag down the RPD helicopter on the roof, but gets attacked by two zombies. Once both zombies swarm him, he loses control of his MP5 machine gun, and hits the pilot of the helicopter, which crashes on top of Elliot and the two zombies, ploughing through the wall to the corridors leading to the gallery and Chief Iron's office. The crash causes a fire explosion which blocks the corridor. 20 years on, and we come to the remake. As Leon or Claire walks down the east wing hallway near the Chief's office and the gallery, a bright light fills the fire escape stairwell, and an almighty crash rocks the building. A helicopter has crashed into the east wing corridor, making it impossible to reach the rear of the building and the roof. But what caused the helicopter to spin out of control and crash into the building? Was it a malfunction with the helicopter, like the incident that stranded the STARS Bravo team in the Arklay Mountains? Or did something more sinister happen? Let's look at the facts. The helicopter crashed into the east wing corridor, which means it came from the south of the building and not the north like the original. There are no signs of anyone trying to flag the helicopter down as part of the rescue operations, either on the roof or on the path near the fire escape. Lastly, there appears to be no bullet holes or gunshot damage to the helicopter both immediately before the crash or after, so we can rule out something shooting it down intentionally or by accident. This leaves us with two options. A very coincidental malfunction timed just with Leon or Claire's arrival at the east wing and the outside path, or a collision with something else which caused the crash. Let's look outside what we can normally see in this moment. We can see the helicopter is already spinning out of control when it crashes, meaning the pilot is either unconscious in flight or the controls won't respond. Sadly, Capcom didn't bother to put a pilot in until after the crash. We also notice the tail of the chopper is smoking, possibly from a collision or mechanical failure in the tail rotor. Without the tail rotor, it's possible for a chopper to spin out of control. But this still begs the question, what could cause the chopper's tail rotor to fail or hit something causing significant damage? It was once believed that Nemesis could have been the cause of the accident. During the time of the Resident Evil 2 remake, the Nemesis was in his second quadrupedal form, and the pilot being spooked by it before colliding with something else could make some sense. But then Nemesis would have had to have gone from the clock tower and the river back to the vicinity of the RPD building. Why it would do this is uncertain, since its primary targets are STARS members, unless it doubled back to go after Brad Vickers once it injured Jill Valentine. Brad was at least in the area of the RPD building, which would draw Nemesis out, then Nemesis would abandon its objective once it found Brad dead or turned. But the time difference of this theory between Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake doesn't really hold up to scrutiny. That's why I believe that Nemesis is not the reason for the chopper crashing at the RPD building. Instead, I believe it was the fault of Mr. X. Now, before I delve into this theory some more, we need to look at how Mr. X got into the city, and we have a clue to this thanks to Nemesis. In Resident Evil 3 Remake, Nemesis is loaded into a steel sarcophagus and loaded onto a helicopter. Once Jill leaves her apartment after her initial encounter with Nemesis, we come across that same steel sarcophagus in the streets near Ripley's, the cinema, and Jack's bar, prized open from the inside forcibly by Nemesis. The way the casket is positioned leads me to believe it was dropped from a great height above the city, by the same transport helicopter deliberately, just to prevent the chopper from being overwhelmed by zombies or survivors desperate to escape. Before Resident Evil 3 Remake was announced, let alone released, Resident Evil 2 did nothing to explain where Mr. X had come from. In the first scenario, you see him killing Ben Bertolucci through the cell wall and later lifting up the helicopter in the hallway to begin stalking you. While in the second scenario, just minutes after the helicopter crash, you check the CCTV in the hallway and see Mr. X stalking the eastern hallway where we first saw Elliot on the cameras. This would mean Mr. X has to have come up through the basement and possibly the car park. But he still doesn't properly appear until you leave the STARS office for the first time. This still begs the question of how is Mr. X responsible for the helicopter crashing? The answer lies in the sarcophagus used to transport Nemesis. In the original Resident Evil 2, Mr. X was dropped in a canister labelled T00 and he crashed through the ceiling of the RPD building's second floor eastern hallway. Now we know in the remake he didn't do this since there is no evidence of him falling through the roof in any section of the station, or any sign of the container he would have been dropped in. So he will have been dropped nearby. Let's assume the design of the sarcophagus is the same or similar to the one that contained Nemesis. The casket will have been dropped from a transport chopper similar to the one carrying Nemesis, and that object will have been moving at terminal velocity into the ground. With it being black and with little distinguishing marks, it would be easy to miss an object like that falling through the sky at speed. Now there are two possible explanations left which I will go through. The one constant between both explanations is that the casket carrying Mr. X and the crashed helicopter will have encountered one another. To make this easier, the helicopter carrying Mr. X will be referred to as X, and the crashed chopper will be referred to as Y. So in this first explanation, Y is hovering near the RPD building, and X is much higher up trying to maintain a safe distance from being identified by anyone within visible range. X would drop its cargo of the Tyrant in the casket directly down, either not knowing or caring what lies below. The casket would shoot down at high speed and would impact the tail rotor, causing Y to spin out of control and crash into the building, with X flying away and the Tyrant leaving its pod and beginning its mission. But the problem with this theory is there is little visible damage to the chopper before it hits the building, and if the pod hit directly with the tail, it would have been ripped clean from the body, and the force from the blow could have knocked the helicopter way more off course. So that leaves my second and more likely theory. The X helicopter would still hover above the Y helicopter at considerable distance, while Y is circling the area around the RPD looking for survivors and a place to land. But the pod dropped by Mr. X would hurtle towards Y. Y would see it and would make a last-minute move to dodge the falling object. It would miss Y by inches, but the pilot has little room to manoeuvre as it is, and would hit a nearby structure, most likely a water tower, or a billboard, taking out its tail rotor or drive shaft inside the tail, causing it to spin out of control violently, and breaking through the walls of the east wing of the RPD building, before exploding into a fiery mess which would trigger more zombies and lickers to encroach on Leon and Claire. But little did they know that something far worse was coming for them. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and share this video and discuss your thoughts in the comments section below. Also, don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to stay notified of new content on the channel. Thank you everyone, and I will see you again soon.